Hey guys, Waterfowler41 here, and in today's video we're going to be installing the SDHQ Billet battery terminal kit on my 2023 Raptor. So over the last couple months I've had a lot of electric accessories, my amp running boards, a new power lead for my subwoofer, a bunch of power leads for my lights, and everything in between. And what's ended up happening is we're basically stacking up one lug after the next, and the battery terminal is looking kind of ugly. And the same goes for the negative. So I got grounds here for some of the lights up front. It's really starting to get disorganized. So what the billet battery kit's going to allow us to do is really clean up where we're tying in for the power and grounds of all these auxiliary accessories. So in the kit, you get a couple new terminals. You get a negative terminal, positive terminal, and then you get a remote negative terminal post. So we're going to be able to tie into this guy instead of having to go right to the battery. And then all the other accessories to make the installation super easy and very clean and turnkey. Now this kit is specifically for the 2021 Raptors and newer. So it's going to be a nice, easy, clean install. Now there's two different kits you could purchase. In my kit, I went with the compression lug nut or compression lug install, which means that I'm going to be stripping the factory wire. I'm going to thread or pass this green bolt over the what's open of the wire, and then tightening this guy down. It's going to basically compress the wires in, and that's how you're going to hook up the main terminal. There is a solder option. I just don't trust my soldering skills, so we went with the compression lug. It's going to be a lot cleaner. As far as tools, nothing beyond a 10mm and a couple other sockets. The only special tool you are going to need is an E16 star socket, because we're going to have to undo the bolt that is holding this battery sensor here, and it's a star socket underneath, and I'll show you once we get it off. But let's get the camera off, or let's get the camera set up and dive right into the installation. So we're going to go ahead and use a 10mm socket to undo the battery terminal itself, and then we're going to pull all these wires off here. So we're going to undo this bolt, or this nut, as well as this nut, and then we're going to unplug the sensor, because we're going to relocate this sensor to the new SDHQ kit. So let's go. All right, so after you remove the 10mm nut on the battery terminal itself, as well as the 10mm nut here on the sensor, this whole terminal can pull off, and then you just leave these wires. We're going to reuse those. Make sure you unplug the sensor before you pull everything off. So that E16 socket comes in right here. So we're going to go ahead and use that E16 bit, or that socket here, to pull off this star bit, and then there's new hardware in the kit here to reinstall this sensor with a regular hex head nut onto the new terminal. So let's get this guy removed, and I'll show you how to reassemble the new negative battery terminal so we could transplant this guy over to that terminal. All right, so once you remove that little star nut, you don't need that anymore, nor do you need the factory negative terminal. You just need that little sensor. What I like most about this kit is they package it up in these little kits, and each kit has its own number, and that's basically how you assemble it. So once you get the kit itself, don't just cut every bag open and dump everything out. Leave it all in the bags, because the bags are packaged in a way that makes sense for the install. So the next thing we're going to do is remove the negative terminal here. And then we're going to take this sensor, drop it down on the negative terminal, use this new nut to attach the bottom lug here to this terminal, and then we're going to slide this black felt washer over the negative terminal on the battery, and then use this little nut and bolt here to attach the negative terminal here, and then we're done with the battery's negative terminal. We can turn our attention to the other side of things. Let's go. All right, so here's our new SDHQ terminal all set up. One thing to note, you want to make sure that the bolt is going from the negative side to the N, because you want to be able to get to the socket on this end, because if you go and install this on the battery and you put it with the bolt backwards, you're not going to be able to get a socket in on there, or you have to use a wrench, which is kind of a pain in the butt. So anyway, 1/2 inch wrench, 1/2 inch socket is what I use to just kind of pre-tighten this guy. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take our black felt little washer here, slide that on, and then might need, oh no, it's right on. So we're going to go ahead and tighten this guy down, and we're good to go. So the sensor's on there, it's tightened down with the new hardware, and then we just need to tighten this guy. We're not going to add any of the wires there yet. We just want to get this terminal installed on the battery up and out of the way. After I do that, I'm going to turn my attention to the positive terminal now. We're going to go ahead and unbolt this guy, pull all the wires off, and again, do the same thing we did with the factory negative side. We're going to remove this terminal from the wire and discard it, because we no longer need it, because we're going to be replacing it with the SDHQ kit. So all right, so once you undo the positive battery terminal, this is what you should be left with. So there's a 10mm nut holding the actual terminal onto the battery, and then there's an 11mm nut that holds a couple wires to the back end of the terminal. So once you pull that off, you're good to go. We're ready to start modifying the positive harness here. So the next thing we're going to do is take a razor blade and cut some of this electric tape, because there is another terminal right here, another wire right here, that we're going to leave intact. We just need to remove it from this terminal, because we need to cut that electric tape off, move this wire out of the way, and then we're gonna take big wire clippers and we're gonna cut this terminal off, trying to leave as much wire as possible. But let's get the electric tape snipped and I'll show you where we're gonna be cutting so we can remove this guy. This guy is a crimp connection, so we have to cut it off. This is the only cutting you need to do on this kit. Other than that, everything else is pretty self-explanatory, pretty plug and play. All right, once you strip off that electric tape, this is what you're left with, and this is the wire that we're gonna wanna remove. So we're gonna slide that guy off the terminal, set it aside. Now the next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna figure out where this metal lug or metal terminal ends, and we're gonna cut this wire. And then what that'll allow us to do is then thread that compression lug on here for us to attach to the positive terminal. So let's go ahead and get some big old wire snippers out, and we're gonna cut this terminal off. We no longer need it. We're gonna be replacing it in the kit, but we wanna find where the wire starts inside this lug. So it might be advantageous to cut this heat shrink off so you really have a good idea where the stuff ends, just to make sure you're cutting and leaving as much wire as possible, because you don't wanna cut too much off and then have to deal with having to pull this guy and kind of reroute some of the wires here. So let's go. Okay, so we have our factory power wire already prepped. I got about 3/4 of an inch of wire exposed there. Now, the next thing we got to do is we got to slip this heat shrink over the wire, slide the bottom end of the compression lug, and then we're going to thread the compression lug on so we can tighten everything down. One thing to note, this is the battery terminal. This is the positive battery terminal. It is important. This is thick wire. It's not easy to work with, but you need to consider the fact that when the terminal itself installs on the battery, it's going to be installed at this angle. So run the wire and figure out what angle you need to install this guy at in order for it to make a nice clean approach to the battery terminal. You don't want to be fighting this guy where you accidentally did it like this or too much that way, because you're going to end up messing up your connection here. So again, just kind of a helpful hint there. So I'm going to go ahead and install this positive terminal. Then before we connect it to the battery itself, we're going to turn our attention to the other side of the ground, and then the project is smooth sailing. We can close this one. All right, now that our power is ready to go, it's heat shrink, everything's good, situated onto the factory wire, we're going to turn our attention to a ground right here. So there's a 10mm bolt holding a factory ground right to the front of I guess this little cross member here right behind the passenger side headlight. Go ahead and undo that, and then that is where we're going to attach this piece. So this is our remote negative terminal block. So this is going to attach to the battery with a thick black cable, but right now you're just going to find the smaller hex head screw, and then there's a 1/4 inch washer that goes with it, and it's going to install just like this into that factory position. Okay, so before we install this guy on that little cross brace up behind the passenger side headlight, the other thing we're going to do is we're going to attach that auxiliary negative cable to it, because it's a pretty tight fitting between the battery and the wall. So we're just going to go ahead and install this guy onto the terminal block, then install a terminal block onto the truck itself, and then wrap the cable around so that it can attach to the battery. It's just going to be a lot easier to do it that way. So we had to go ahead and pour out all of the hardware here. Go ahead and find this size bolt, and this is what's going to go through the larger side of this cable. There's a small terminal and a large terminal. The small terminal is going to go on the battery side. This is going to go on the block side. Then this bolt is going to drop right through here, and then we're going to attach it right to the bottom of this block. That way when we install this block, it's already attached and we're not going to have to mess with it. Again, it's a pretty tight fit in here, and it's just easier to do it that way and kind of preload it or pre-install it before we attach it to the battery. So let's get that block installed, and then that that cable is going to run around here, and it's ultimately going to attach to this terminal right here once we stack up everything on there. All right, so our remote ground block or ground terminal block is installed, and I went ahead and attached all the factory as well as my light grounds to that, as well as my amp ground for the subwoofer in my truck. So everything's nice and clean installed on here into the pre-threaded ports, so it's a nice clean look, but it also cleans up all the grounds and gets it off the factory point. I really don't like stacking things up on the factory point if I can avoid it, and with this kit you can. The next thing we're going to do, other than that, the cable that is attached to that remote block is just loosely run over here. Ultimately, when we go to make final connections, we're going to attach this guy right to this post here. Then the other thing I did is install the red felt little washer on the positive terminal for the battery. So now that we have our ground side situated, we're going to work on our positive terminal. So we got the terminal itself ready to go. I already have the bolt threaded through so we can attach it to the terminal. The other thing we're going to do is locate this through bolt. This through bolt is going to thread through the terminal that we installed on the power. It's going to thread through here, pass through the terminal block, and then we're going to put a nut on this side. You need to make sure you do this before you install this on the battery terminal, because you're not going to have access to slide this through there. The battery's too big and there's not enough room to slide it through. So that's how we're going to install it. And then I have a few other power accessories we're going to attach to a couple of these points here. Again, the big highlight here is you have a lot of options. So figure out which one works best for where your wires. I like to keep things concealed, so I'm going to try to attach as many of them as I can to these back portions. So that it gives it a nice clean look. Then after we install that positive terminal, we're gonna go ahead and install this little rubber cap that goes on top of it to give it a nice finished look. All right, so our positive terminal is fully installed. We got that through bolt that's attached to that main power lug. Everything's attached to the battery. It's looking good. Then all my accessories are tapped into the 2 threaded inserts in the back. So my amp running boards, my lights, and my amp. That's all attached to the back, as well as that little tiny wire that was attached with the main harness here. Now the last thing I have to connect is this little guy. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to install this cap first, and then that wire is going to get installed on top because you have access to those bolts. I think that'll give it a nice clean look. Here is the negative terminal. Everything looks good. Our new auxiliary little pigtail that comes off the battery jots down over here, attaches to the negative terminal block on the wall, and everything's good. Everything's looking great. Last thing we're going to do, like I said, is just attach this guy after we put that little rubber grommet on there. But let's do that real quick, take a look at the final product, and then shut this one out. I will say this project probably takes about 30 minutes. What takes the longest is if you have a lot of extra wires that you've added, like my amp running boards and everything, my lights, it's just figuring out what terminal you're going to use that gives you the best runs and the cleanest runs on all this stuff. So that probably takes longer than the actual install of the kit. So it's nice to have all these options, but at the end of the day, now I got so many options that I want to be really OCD with my wires in terms of how I run it. So you just take your time there. All right, so everything's done. I think it's a silicone or rubber cap looks great on there. Like I said, I took that main power cable, just went over the top. Nice clean look. Negative terminals all plugged in. Do not forget to plug that sensor in. I would imagine you're going to throw a lot of codes if you don't plug the sensor in before you finish up your project here, and it's a very easy thing to forget about. But anyway, use the factory hardware to reinstall everything to the terminal on the negative side. Make sure you have nice clean runs with all your wires. On the positive side, use whatever terminals work best for your accessories, or just know where they're at, so when you add additional accessories later on, you have easy access. You have a ton of hardware that comes in the kit. Use what you need for your application. You're not going to use all of it. There's no possible way to use all of it. Just use the ones that work for your application. But hopefully this helps you with your install of the SDHQ Billet battery kit. I absolutely love it. It cleaned up a lot, and it really does give me a lot of nice home runs for the powers and grounds for all my accessories. But with that said, thank you very much for watching. Appreciate it. Have a good one. Bye.